Hey guys, Hamsterbull here with a new video, and today we're gonna check out who currently is the best DPS in Classic Wrath Lich King. Because not too long ago Ulduar was released, which means the second raid in Wrath Lich King, and we're gonna see just how things are right now with who is the best DPS. Before I delve into each fight in Ulduar and also go over the last overall view of who's the best DPS, I really quickly want to go through what things were like in late phase 1 with Naxxramas. And this is what it was like in late phase 1 with Naxxramas. First of all, Unholy Death Knight was by far the best because the Gargoyle was just so damn overpowered. And it got a nerf, so it's really going to be cool to see how things have affected the Unholy Death Knight class moving into Phase 2. Number 2 was the Affliction Warlock, number 3 the Demonology Warlock, Assassination Rogue was number 4, Enhancement Shaman number 5, and way at the bottom we had Retribution Paladins and Beast Mastery Hunters, Frost Mages, Subtlety Rogues, and we'll see if those things are kind of the same. So this right here was the list that we had in late Phase 1 in Naxxramas. So let's go over the fights in Ulduar right now. And the first fight in Ulduar is Flame Leviathan. I don't really want to talk too much about this because it is of course purely based on vehicle combat, so it doesn't really affect your personal class that much. So we're just going to skip over this one really quick. This is Flame Leviathan. Let's go through number 2. Alright, so here is Ignis the Furnace Master, the first one that we're going to talk about. And who is on top? Is it Unholy DK? No, it is Assassination Rogue who is number 1, Affliction Warlock number 2, Enhancement Shaman number 3, Frost DK at number 4, Demonology Warlock at number 5, and kind of in the above average range we have Unholy Death Knight. So if you look at late phase 1, where Unholy DK was absolutely dominating a lot of the fights, in the very first fight that we're looking at right now, Unholy DK is actually at number 7 or 8. So they took kind of a big hit from the Gargoyle nerf, which didn't allow them to stack haste anymore. It does stack attack power, but yeah, it definitely affected the Unholy DK class quite a bit. It's also nice to see that Feral Druids are doing actually okay here. They were really struggling in late phase 1 and in early phase 1, and here they're doing around, above average DPS. Same as the Fire Mage around the middle, Destruction Warlock in the middle, Elemental Shaman. That is all kind of to be expected. And the big losers here are Subtlety Rogue, Frost Mage, Gladiator Warrior, but they're always at the bottom. They're not considered proper PvE specs. But also Retribution Paladins, which once again really are suffering in this phase. They're not going to be great until later on. So there you go. This is Ignis. Let's go on to Razorscale. Now we're moving on to Razorscale, and for Razorscale, the Unholy DK actually managed to claim the number 1 spot. So I guess not all is lost for that crazy DPS spec. Affliction Warlock is number 2, Demonology Warlock is number 3, Arcane Mage doing surprisingly well here, as well as the 2 Rogue specs and Frost DK. Around the middle we have our Fire Mages, Balance Druids, Enhancement Shamans, and Survival Hunters, Elemental Shamans, and Destruction Warlocks. And once again, kind of at the bottom, which we saw in late phase 1 and early phase 1, we have Frost Mages, Feral Druids, and unfortunately the Hunter specs also not doing too great here, apart from Survival, which is kind of in the middle. So there you go, that is Razorscale. Okay, now we're moving on to Assembly of Iron, and yes, I skipped over XT because there's no data available on Warcraft logs right now as I'm making this video, which is kind of weird, but, there's nothing there, so I can't talk about it. Which means we're going to talk about Assembly of Iron. Number 1 is the Affliction Warlock, number 2, Assassination Rogue, number 3, Frost Death Knight. So Unholy DK here, kind of struggling to keep up with the rest of them. They're kind of on, slightly above average right here. Sharing places here with the Marksmanship Hunter and Enhancement Shaman. Both Druid specs are not doing that great here of the Assembly of Iron. Other than that, we have Survival Hunter doing quite well, and Fire Mage not doing too bad either, also beating the Arcane Mage spec. Now, Fire is usually considered better in later Wrath, and Arcane is usually considered the go-to spec in early Wrath Lich King, Naxxramas and maybe early Ulduar. And you're really going to see a switch from Fire Mage in early phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and going on through the raids that Wrath Lich King has to offer. So there you go, that is Assembly of Iron. Okay, so moving on to Cologarn, and we have Enhancement Shaman this time, being the number 1 DPS on this fight. Unholy DK not too far behind with the number 2, so once again they're really strong here. Affliction Warlock number 3, Elemental Shaman doing quite well here, which is really nice to see. Frost DK, and then also Balance Druid, which are usually not found at the top. The Elemental Shaman and Balance Druid are usually around the middle. So it's really cool to see them here kind of, above average, doing quite well for themselves. in this fight. Also, once again, Fire Mage doing much better than Arcane Mage here. And we also see Retribution Paladin, which is usually always around the bottom. They're actually doing not too bad here. As well for both Fury and Arms, which are, still kind of at the bottom. But Arms and Fury are usually like way down here. And now they're at least not at the absolute bottom. And that's of course because Cologarn has a lot of ads and, classes like Retribution Paladins, especially Balance Druids, like things with Starfall, they can really benefit a lot from these AoE packs during this boss fight. So there you go. Nice to see the Enhancement Shaman here. I always had a weak spot for Enhancement Shamans, and it's really nice to see them doing well, as well for the Elemental spec. I love that too. So there you go. That is Cologarn so far. Then we move on to Ariaya. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm really bad with pronouncing some of these bosses. I'm sorry about that. And we have Demonology Warlock on number 1. Not too surprising. We saw this a lot in early and late phase 1. Demo just being a very strong spec. However, surprisingly here, Survival Hunter doing quite well here. Number 2. You barely ever see Hunters really dominating at certain fights in Wrath Lich King. And here they are number 2. So they're doing really well for themselves. And once again, Unholy DK, despite the nerf, still managing to do solid DPS here. Taking number 3 spot, Affliction Warlock number 4, and Combat Rogue number 5. And then kind of in the middle we have our Balance Druids, Fire Mages unfortunately not doing too well. However, Fury Warriors kind of in the middle here, which is really nice to see. They're able to actually do quite well in this boss fight, which is nice because usually they're at the bottom. And the rest, unfortunately, again, Feral Druids kind of really struggling here to do solid DPS. I was really hoping that Feral Druids would do a lot better, but as we move on to the fights, you'll see that they're still not doing that great. And I'm really hoping that we'll maybe see a change, maybe in late phase 2, maybe during TOC, maybe during ICC, who knows. But for now, yeah, they're not doing too great for themselves. Okay, now it's time for Hoe Deer, and would you look at that? Would you look at the absolute domination of Fire Mages here? Absolutely by far the best DPS spec for this boss fight, followed by Arcane Mage and Balance Druids. Really nice to see Balance Druids up there. I also have a weak spot for Druids, especially the Boom King class. It's nice to see them at number 3. But man, look at that domination from Fire Mages. Absolutely crazy. And that's mostly due to the Storm Cloud buff that you get on this boss, if you get it. And that gives you a lot of crit, and basically Fire Mages are obsessed with crit. If they get a ton of crit, they're able to pump out some amazing DPS, which absolutely shows here on this fight. They're completely dominating. If you look at the DPS from number 1 and number 2, which is both mage classes, Fire does an average of 26,000, and Arcane does give or take 4,700 DPS less. So that is a crazy amount of DPS. Also, the max DPS recorded in this 99th percentile was 30,000 DPS, which is just kind of nuts. That's what people are doing in heroic ICC 25-man mode on private servers. So yeah, really nice to see Fire Mages absolutely dominating here. And the bottom, once again, is made up by Retribution Paladins, Feral Druids, and Fury Warriors. And yeah, there you go. Blue is the way to go on this boss fight. Then we move on to Thorum. We don't really see any major domination here by any spec. We do have the Affliction Warlock on number 1, followed very closely by the Assassination Rogue. Unholy DK, once again, there it is, poking its head through at the number 3 spot, doing still very well despite that nerf. Enhancement Shaman number 4, and Demonology Warlock number 5. Other than that, we don't really have any major surprises here. Both Druid specs not doing that great here. Fire and Arcane here kind of struggling to do solid DPS. This is really not a great fight for them. And once again, unfortunately for the Retribution Paladins and the Warriors, they're not doing great. They're way down on the bottom. So there you go. That is Thorum for you guys. Alright, then we move on to Freya, and we have the Demonology Warlock here on number 1. Fire Mage once again doing pretty darn good for themselves at the number 2 spot. Frost DK actually beating Unholy DK in this fight, which is kind of cool to see because usually it's Unholy DK that's dominating and Frost is usually more down the bottom. But here Frost actually works really well with it taking the number 3 spot, Affliction Warlock number 4, and Survival Hunter doing actually quite well themselves, being able to make the top 5 spot in this boss fight. Unfortunately, once again, the Druids are really struggling here, both Balance and Feral being kind of average, below average. And then at the bottom we have Destruction Warlock, which, never really meant to be a proper PvE spec, though in some fights they really shined and did solid DPS. Here, they're just way down at the bottom. Elemental Shaman's also really struggling, and Arcane Mage as well. So yeah, if you want to go, if you're a mage and you want to do a lot of DPS on Freya, just go Fire, it's the way to go. So there you go, that is Freya for you guys. Let's move on to Mimiron. Okay, Mimiron, the mechanic gnome, we have Affliction Warlock this time dominating, or not dominating, but being number 1. And once again, look at that Fire Mage at number 2. It really seems that Fire in Ulduar with some gear, if you know, especially if you're phase 2 biz probably, you're gonna do some solid DPS here. So Fire Mage definitely doing a great job, and both DK specs at number 3 and 4, so they're definitely doing alright for themselves. And Survival Hunter also not doing too bad. Now it's pretty interesting here because look at Arms Warrior there, which is not doing too great, but considering how, you know, how badly they're doing on the rest of the fights, you know, usually at the bottom, here they are actually not doing too bad, as well as the Fury Warrior spec. So those two specs are actually not too bad on Mimiron. Unfortunately for the Druids, once again, it's not looking too great. Balanced Druid, kind of average, below average, and Feral just way down at the bottom there. Unfortunate. Very unfortunate. I have a weak spot for Druids, like I said before. Kind of sad to see them there, but you know what? It is what it is. Okay, and then we move on to General Vizax. And people always told me that Elemental Shamans do really well in this boss fight. I didn't really know because I mostly rated as a Warlock or a Balanced Druid. And well, actually it shows in the logs, because look at that. Elemental Shaman takes the number 1 spot. We haven't seen that before, so it's really cool to see them have one fight at least where they can really shine and take the number 1 spot. Very close behind is the Arcane Mage, and this is pretty interesting because all 3 Mage specs are doing really well here. Because look at number 4, Frost Mage at number 4. That's pretty crazy. And I don't know if you guys can see, the text is kind of small, but if you look at the parses that were recorded through Warcraft logs, Elemental has 239, Arcane Mage has 1100 parses, Fire Mage has 184, and Frost 3. 3 parses that were recorded for this fight. So there were apparently 3 people out of the thousands of people that rated Ulduar that decided to give Frost a go, and they actually did really, really well. They beat out a lot of other classes and a lot of other specs. So, you know, if you're a PvP, if you have Frost as a PvP spec and you just want to mess around but still do really crazy DPS, I guess, hey man, go Frost and General Vizax and have fun. It's really cool to see him up there. So yeah, really cool, a really good fight for mages because all 3 specs really are really good to hear. Affliction Warlock is on number 5. And we have Balanced Druids actually not doing too bad. And also Shadow Priests. Now Shadow Priests are usually kind of average, below average if you look at all the fights. Here they're actually not too bad with a number 6 spot. So yeah, good job for the Shadow Priest. And unfortunately, again, Retribution Paladins, they're not having a great day because they're once again at the bottom, shared with Fury Arms and Beast Mastery Hunter, Combat Road 2, and Unholy DK, which normally was dominating, right now is not doing too great either. And also its counterpart, Frost DK, also not doing too great. This is a really good fight for, well, it shows there, Elemental Shaman, all the mage specs, Affliction Warlock, Shadow Priest, and Boomkin. So there you go, General Vizax. Okay, we got 2 more fights, and we're going to start off with Yogg Saron. And once again, look at that, Fire Mage at number 1. Fire doing really well in Ulduar apparently. Demonology Warlock at number 2. Affliction at number 3. And then we have both the Death Knight specs taking up the number 4 and 5 spot. Now we do see that Balanced Druids are also doing quite well. Shadow Priest actually doing quite well here. And then we have the Survival Hunter. And then kind of in the middle we have Enhancement Shaman, Arcane Mage, Assassination Rogue, Elemental Shaman. And then we have Retribution Paladin, which is kind of still slightly below average, but at least they're not completely down in the bottom, so you know, at least there's that for them. And the bottom once again is made up by Fury Arms Warriors and both Marksmanship and Beast Mastery Hunter. So it really seems that if you want to do solid DPS as a hunter on Yogg Saron, survival is the way to go. The other ones are just way worse. So there you go, that is Yogg Saron. Once again, the Fire Mage takes the number 1 spot. And then last but not least, we have Algalon, and we have Affliction Warlock dominating in this fight, followed very closely by the Unholy DK. So once again, Unholy DK, despite the nerf, still being able to do strong DPS through several of these fights. Number 3, we have Assassination Rogue. Number 4, once again, Survival Hunter, because if you look at the bottom, we see Marksmanship Hunter and Beast Mastery way down at the bottom, while we see Survival Hunter being very strong at number 4. So if you're a hunter and you're doing this boss, hey man, survival is the way to go. Number 5, we have Enhancement Shaman. Number 6, Frost DK. And then once again, the middle, it's kind of made up by Shadow Priest, Balanced Druids. Retribution Paladin actually not doing too bad here. They're kind of, you know, slightly below average. So it's not all doom and gloom. But again, you're not going to see any Retribution Paladins probably on the number 2 or, you know, top 5 here during this raid. So yeah, there you go. Those are all the boss fights. Now, more importantly, let's look at the total damage and see who is the grand winner of early phase 2. Alright, and here it is. Here is the complete overview of all the bosses in Ulduar. So, our top 5 is as following. Number 1, Affliction Warlock. Number 2, Fire Mage. Number 3, Demonology Warlock. And 4 and 5 are being taken up by both Unholy DK and Frost DK specs. So, there you go. And unfortunately, the big losers here are Retribution Paladins, Frost Mages, Arms Warrior, Solid Rogue, Gladiator Warrior. Things we're all kind of familiar with to be at the bottom. Now, if you look more to the right, I have an overview here where you can see the old position. So this is the position that the classes were in and the specs were in late phase 1 and what their new position is in early phase 2. And you can see the change. If it's red, obviously that's bad. That means they dropped. If it's green, that means it's good and they moved up. And you can see some pretty big winners and some pretty big losers here. The biggest loser of all is Combat Rogue, which used to be number 6 and now they're at number 13, so they dropped off really hard. Unholy DK, unfortunately, because of that nerf, they really had to trade places. They went from number 1 to number 4. Still not too bad, but you know, definitely not the crazy domination we saw when they were doing a Nax with that crazy, you know, Gargle, which could stack haste and stack attack power. So there you go. They unfortunately had to trade places, and now it is Affliction Warlock that went from number 2 to number 1. Demonology Warlock stayed the same, and we have 2 really big winners here. First of all, the Frost Death Knight. They went from number 11 to number 5, which means they moved up 6 positions. But the biggest winner, so not the grand winner, which is, as you can see, Affliction Warlock, they're number 1. But the biggest winner, as in terms of how much positions they moved up, is the Fire Mage. They went from number 12 to number 2, and that is pretty darn crazy. And it's mostly also because of some fights where they can do really well. For instance, Hoe Deer, where we saw complete domination by them, and it's just looking very good for the Fire Mages. You know, like I said, they're obsessed with crit. The better the gear, the more DPS they're gonna pump out. And I think late phase 2, moving on to TOC and then ICC, you're gonna see them more and more on the top, as opposed to early phase 1 and late phase 1 just next Rammus, where we saw them kind of struggling, you know, being in the middle. So they really moved up and now are the second best spec for Ulduar. Other than that, we can point out that Destruction Warlock, which actually wasn't too bad, was mostly considered a PvP spec. They were number 10 in late phase 1, they're now number 14, so they're really starting to drop down. And I think as well, as we're moving along through these phases, they're going to drop down more and more and more, because the other 2 specs are just better, and other specs are just going to catch up and leave Destruction Warlock in the dust. What's also kind of cool to see is that Shadow Priests, I've always had a bit of a weak spot for Shadow Priests as well, because they were, you know, early vanilla, they were kind of a meme spec. They actually moved up quite well too. They went from number 15 to number 10. So now they broke into the top 10, which is also really nice to see. And really, other than that, there's no major changes. You see a few positions here and there, but nothing completely major. Nothing like we've seen with the Combat Rogue, with nothing that we've seen with the Frost DK or the Fire Mage. So we have some really big winners in this phase, and we have some really big losers as well. But despite all of it, Affliction Warlock takes the number 1, Fire Mage number 2, and Demonology Warlock number 3. And that is your top 3, and also an overview of the best DPS spec in Ulduar. Hope you guys liked this video, and of course we'll be revisiting this when it's late phase 2, and we'll see who then is the best DPS. But for now, there you go. This is the result of early phase 2. So guys, once again, as always, I want to thank you for watching this video. I'm Hamster Wheel, and have a good one.